Dust rose in thin curls where Aisha knelt on red earth at the edge of Balogun Market, her small hands cupping a ragged bowl, while danfo horns and hawkers' cries blurred into a hard, indifferent roar. The stakes were simple and cruel. If she did not find food for Kemi's fever and Musa's shaking small body before sundown, a clinic would close its doors, and the social services van might take the children into a shelter she could never visit. Who would answer when a homeless mother begged for food in a city where the market's heartbeat drowned out pleas? And what could a single bowl of stew mean against eviction notices and the lawyers of developers? A silhouette in a dark overcoat watched from the edge of the crowd like a thing that did not belong in the heat and sweat of street life. Was he a guardian, or a stranger with more power than mercy? And why did his hand tremble, as if remembering something long buried? The question thudded against her ribs like a second heartbeat, and then a woman with flour on her apron offered Aisha a steaming pinch of garri that smelled of palm oil and salt, and someone in the crowd mouthed a name that would not leave her mind. Aisha's ordinary world had been small, steady, and stubbornly proud. Mornings before dawn to fry akara on an oil-scarred pan, afternoons carrying a basket to market, evenings telling stories of the sea to Kemi, while Musa drifted to sleep against her shoulder. She was a widow who loved quietly and kept dignity like a worn cloth folded in her bag. She believed in showing up, in not taking what was not offered, in teaching her children to stack hope like bricks so that even when the rain came, the house might stand. The market sellers called her Auntie, and Mariam, the yam seller, lent her sugar when the month ran long. Living under the bridge at Oshodi had taught Aisha the rhythm of generators humming through the night, and the river of hurt that wealth could not always dam. Upscale cars shone like mirrors on the road above, while she wrapped herself in second-hand blankets and listened to the harmattan breath across corrugated roofs. Yet she had never imagined her bowl would make headlines, nor that a hidden hand would decide to answer a plea. The bowl steamed against the cooling air, and the crowd shuffled closer with questions in their eyes. The day everything shifted began as small cruelties stacked like plates. The landlord, a man named Mr. Okoro, who always smelled faintly of eau de cologne and sulfur, had sold the plot beneath their shack to a developer who wanted glossy glass and a parking lot, and the eviction notice arrived on glossy paper with a polite signature that felt like a slap. Aisha had tried to bargain with Mr. Okoro, had told him about the children's measles shot due next month, had offered to trade food for time, but his mouth stayed a hard line and his lawyer's cards lay like knives on the table. When she finally left the tiny house, it smelled of boiled beans and childhood, and the children's toys lay on the floor like abandoned islands. That afternoon, trying to collect herself among the market stalls, Aisha's hunger did not have a patience for negotiations. She extended her hand and asked for a meager plate, and a cluster of merchants pointed and laughed until a camera phone took the scene, and the market's laughter curdled into something else. The image was sharp and unkind. What would the photograph bring with it, and who was watching with that overcoat at the crowd's edge? The first trial came with a fever. Kemi burned through the night with skin tight and eyes glazed, and the clinic's waiting room smelled of antiseptic and anxious murmurs, while the generator hummed like a caged insect outside. Aisha counted coins with fingers that trembled. 200 naira here, enough for paracetamol for now, but not for the consultation that would steady Kemi against fever's cruelty. She felt each naira like an old friend leaving town. A nurse shifted her weight and said, "The doctor will see you if you can pay the deposit." And Aisha's throat closed, the world narrowing to the sound of Kemi's breath. The overcoat man had left a note tucked on the clinic counter. No name, only a hastily scrawled number. And Aisha felt a strange, shaking curiosity. Who would risk leaving help where anyone could take it, and whose hand would call her life into a new story? The second trial arrived like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Pastor Ade, polished shoes and kind eyes, came as a savior at the mosque courtyard where Aisha had gone because the imam sometimes distributed leftover rice, and he spoke soft words about faith and community while his assistant photographed the family with a practiced tenderness. He offered shelter, then forms, then what looked like benevolence on the surface. Aisha signed what she thought were intake papers for a program and was given a mat and a place to sleep under a tarpaulin that smelled of incense. But when Pastor Ade suggested that those who received charity would need to give back through labor at his soup kitchen and hand over any small earnings to the church's fund, Aisha's stomach dropped. He meant to keep them invisible and grateful, and his assistant's camera kept recording. The pastor's kind voice trembled into command, and Aisha felt the first burn of betrayal. Why did salvation come wrapped in paperwork and cameras, and what would they ask of her dignity in return? A sudden rain, sheets of warm water that steam rose from as it hit the hot red earth, turned the market into a river of umbrellas and tears, and with the storm, Aisha's meager savings washed from a cracked satchel by a careless boy running for shelter. The danfo horns honked like a chorus calling the whole city to motion, and her small jar that held coins for school fees rolled into a drain like a coin sinking into memory. Without the savings, her plan to start selling akara under a new tin awning after the eviction fell apart, and she felt the future slip from her hands as if the city were a clever animal, always edging its teeth into hope. A viral video appeared the next morning. Someone had posted Pastor Ade's sermon with clips of Aisha begging, and the comments stung. Did she seek pity? Were the children ill? Was she conning donors? The market's gossip turned into verdicts, and Aisha wondered if a single moment could erase years of honest toil. Public humiliation became its own trial when a slanderous clip, cropped and cold, painted Aisha as a fraud who chose begging over labor, and merchants who had once called her auntie crossed the street to avoid her shadow. The taste of cola nuts and sugar hardened into salt at the back of her throat as faces closed like doors. A man who had once bought akara from her stood with an expensive phone and smirked. A mother stepped over her as if a scorpion lay coiled at her feet. Aisha clutched Kemi and Musa, and thought of the eviction notice with its polite signature, of the developer's glossy renderings, and of the note with the scribbled number at the clinic. Would anyone remember the small kindness from the woman with flour on her apron, and who was the mysterious observer whose eyes had looked like someone who could change the shape of things? It was Malika who offered the seed of kindness, a woman with hands stained by yams and a laugh that pealed like a bell, who nudged Aisha under a cloth stall and pressed a bowl of pounded yam and stew into her hand, saying, "Eat, child, and keep your voice for when you need it," while the generator coughed in the background and the market's throng moved like a slow sea. Malika's gesture was simple and fierce. She wiped a moth-eaten spoon and sat with Aisha as Kemi ate, and Aisha felt the old cloak of gratitude wrap round her heart. When Malika told the story later to a neighbor, she did it without drama, and Aisha could not know that a man had taken a photo of the two women together, his thumb on a screen, his face half hidden beneath a hat. The image landed in a private inbox that night and woke a sleeping memory for a man who had made his fortune decades ago selling garri and learning the markets by touch. Aisha only felt the warmth of the bowl and the small, steady promise that kindness stayed. It would matter, she thought, but did not yet know why. Time closed like a fist. 3 days until the bulldozers were due to clear the lot that sheltered their shack. 2 nights until the electricity cutoff would dim the clinic's machines and Kemi's breathing eased only by oxygen that might not come, and a single application for a small microloan that required a guarantor and a city ID she could not afford to replace sat unanswered in a government office. Aisha's options thinned to the width of a single path: borrow from a predatory lender and mortgage dignity for a roof, accept Pastor Ade's terms and tie herself to servitude, or find a way to plead her case in public and risk further humiliation. Each choice bore a sharp consequence: lose her children to a system that favored neat papers, or trade her liberty for a mattress under surveillance. The overcoat man's number flick aired on the old mobile she had found in a shop's trash, and when she hesitated, her thumb trembled over the screen. Would she call and let destiny decide, or hold fast to a stubborn pride that had kept her whole through worse weather? The hidden identity cracked open like a dry pod at dawn on the fifth day, when Aisha answered the number and a voice said, "My name is Ifedayo Okonkwo," and the air around her narrowed and widened at once. She had heard the name in market whispers, in the polite economy pages. A man who never attended openings but whose shadow paid the city's happiest debts. Ifedayo spoke as if he had been close for years. He had watched, he said, from a distance. He had made his fortune in glass and concrete and was tired of watching people be moved like pieces on a board for someone else's profit. Aisha's mind ricocheted. Why would a billionaire reach for a homeless mother's bowl, and what did he want in return? He did not want a story for his PR or a staged photograph. He wanted the truth of what happened at the market, and the name of the man who sold their lot, and the paperwork threaded through the developer's palms. The revelation reframed everything. This was not charity alone, but an offer that required courage. Aisha felt fear and a strange, fierce hope prickling her skin. Could she use this chance to demand justice without trading her soul? Darkness came quickly after the revelation, as the richest man's involvement turned the market into a stage and the vultures circled. Lawyers arrived wearing that exact shade of beige that smiles on contracts. Pastor Ade's assistant leaked a doctored tape to a tabloid, and Mr. Okoro hired men to erase traces of the sackcloth home. The community that had once murmured support now feared being associated with trouble. Aisha sat on a curb as the harmattan breathed through her hair, and the children slept with mouths open and wild dreams. She felt the old hunger for survival, but also a new line drawn in the earth, one that separated begging from speaking. The billionaire offered money, yes, but with the condition that Aisha go public with the truth about the eviction and the charity racket, to bring cameras into places painful and raw, and risk that the world might still look away. Standing at the center of that choice, she remembered Malika's bowl and the imam's soft refusal to take pictures, and she chose dignity. She would speak truth, not take hush money cloaked as mercy. Market day of reckoning arrived like thunder breaking. Aisha stood on a makeshift stage of wooden crates while danfo horns quieted and the crowd gathered, if only to watch the spectacle. Ifedayo stood at the back in the crowd as a man without a name until he raised his hand and the microphone found him like a stone in a river. Aisha spoke in a voice roughened by hunger and honed by necessity. She named Mr. Okoro's sale, read the clause in the developer's permit, and described Pastor Ade's conditions and the images that had been stitched to defame her. Cameras flashed, and a legal team from the Owena Group, Ifedayo's company, stepped forward with documents that contradicted the developer's permit and a photograph that matched the one taken that morning under the tarpaulin. The market held its breath, as Ifedayo announced he had purchased the lot and any pending eviction was suspended while a full audit investigated the sale. His answer, he said, was not to buy silence, but to buy time and expose the rot that let a greedy man profit from the displacement of families. The sound was not silence exactly, but a hush that felt like justice, and even the danfo horns seemed to sigh with the relief of brakes released. The antagonist's consequences arrived with the clarity of daylight. Mr. Okoro's signature on the sale was revealed to be forged, his stamp traced to a printing press that had been on the developer's payroll, and Pastor Ade found himself under investigation when the assistant's footage, the one he thought destroyed, surfaced with a timestamp that did not lie. The developer's license was suspended pending inquiry. Men who had promised quick cash to clear the lot found their bank accounts frozen by a court order, and the tabloid that had run the slander printed a retraction and an apology that tasted like metal on Aisha's tongue. On the market stage, Aisha watched as those who had mocked her turned their faces red with shame, and as Ifedayo stepped forward to say he had been a boy who once begged for an extra piece of bread while learning to sell garri on a corner. He had not forgotten the weight of such hands. The crowd's noise changed tone from cruelty to a clapping that felt like a small rain. Everyone felt justice as something tactile rather than abstract. When the dust settled, the new normal was a visible thing. Ifedayo kept his word and converted the lot into a community hub, a row of concrete stalls for displaced sellers, a microloan office for women like Aisha, and a health kiosk that would not shut down when generators faltered. Aisha received a small grant to start a proper Akara stall she named Kemi's Dawn, and the children got school scholarships so Kemi could recover without missed classes and Musa could stop clutching at an imaginary blanket every night. Malika's apron smelled of frying oil once again, and the generator outside the hub hummed a steady, benevolent rhythm rather than the anxious cough that had once forecasted fear. Aisha purchased a small plastic chair and a metal pan, and the market tasted once more of oil and laughter and not of hunger. Pastor Aid faced charges, Mr. Okoro's name became a cautionary whisper, and the developer's glossy renderings were pulled until the audit returned clear and fair plans. The wealth gap had not vanished, but the billionaire's answer had shifted how the market's voice could be used to protect rather than profit from the poor. Aisha slept with Kemi and Musa under a corrugated roof that did not tremble with worry, and when she woke, she felt the comfort of a life that had not been erased, but rebuilt. There are two small, heavy lessons at the center of this story. Kindness, even the smallest bowl given in private, plants roots that may reach down into the richest soil and one day bear fruit. And power can be used to silence a crowd or to amplify the truth, so watch carefully who answers when a voice is small and whether they seek to buy a story or to fix a wrong. Do not judge a life by the shame shown in a single photograph. People carry chapters that do not tell the whole book, and sometimes neighbors with little must hold the line until someone with means remember. Or is the price of mercy? If this story moved you, leave a comment below with your thoughts or a memory of a kindness that surprised you. And if you like this tale, please subscribe, like, and share so the next story finds more ears. Turn on notifications and come back for another folk tale that walks the dusty streets and quiet courtyards of our cities with heart. 2 weeks later, under a sky learning to be generous again, Aisha arrived before dawn to find the market's new spine standing where tarpaulins once flapped, sturdy stalls, a row of solar lamps catching the first pale gold, and a plaque that read, Kemi's Dawn Community Hub, with Ifedayo Okonkwo's name etched in clean letters as if mercy could be codified and measured. The air carried a different rhythm now. The generator hummed not in fear but in purpose. Danfo horns sounded like a chorus praising a public plan, and Malika's apron hung on a peg with a small bronze tag that read, Volunteer Coordinator, a badge the old woman never would have worn without a story that could be trusted. Aisha moved through the bustle like a ship through a familiar harbor, but each face wore a new tilt of recognition. Neighbors who once whispered about the cameras, now nodding as if their own eyes could testify to the truth that had finally landed in their street. The first morning the hub opened, a dozen women lined up for the microloan desk, the form easier to fill than a bottle of palm wine, and a nurse stood by the health kiosk with a steady calm that did not pretend poverty didn't bite, only promised care when the bite came. Ifedayo's shadow, long and pale as a late afternoon shade, was not on camera this time. He spoke softly to Aisha in a corridor lined with glass, saying, We start with listening first, and we publish nothing that harms a child or harms a neighbor. And his voice carried a rare tenor of restraint that made the room go quiet enough for a child to hear the truth in a spoonful of stewed yam. The twist, the interval beat that had shocked a city into conscience, had not vanished into applause. It sat in the corners like a beneficial memory, a reminder that power could be patient and that money could be used not to erase a market's pain, but to illuminate the hidden corners. Here, pain hid. Then came the moment that felt like a legal sunrise, a public town hall where Ifedayo rolled out a transparent charter for the hub, seed grants for 6 months, a community board elected by consensus, and a quarterly audit that would publish plainly who spent what and why, while a public screen displayed the reconstructed sale documents, the forged signature, and the printing press mark that had once seemed only a footnote in a city's grudge story. Aisha did not feel triumphant in the old sense. Instead, she felt the weight of the room lift and the weight of the people's gaze settle into a shared responsibility. "We did not beg for mercy," she told the crowd, choosing words that did not demand pity, but demanded a future. A volley of short, honest lines followed from Malika, from a mother who had once feared the camera's gaze, and from a young market vendor who whispered, "We are here to keep watch." The bells from a nearby church joined the street sounds, and a gust of wind carried the scent of fresh pepper and rain on zinc roofs, as if the city itself approved. The turning point came not with a single shout, but with a quiet consent, the people choosing to trust a system they could audit, not a hero who promised relief with a smile and a pocketful of debt. The board meeting that afternoon produced a schedule. The first 4 stalls to be refurbished with a grant from Ifedayo's foundation, a portion of the micro-loan pool earmarked for single mothers, and training workshops on bookkeeping and small business storytelling to replace the old market gossip that had once weaponized a photograph. The community exhaled in a chorus of sighs and small victories, and Aisha, who had learned to count by the rhythm of fever breaths and the clack of a kettle, learned to count differently now. Count the days the clinic would stay open, count the children's clean shots and the bus routes that would carry them to school, count the people who would walk past with a new name for the market, one of resilience, not survival. In the mid-paragraph turning point, a quiet document made its own dramatic entrance. A supplier's ledger, a donor's note, and a time-stamped email that proved the caretaker of hope had never been a single white knight, but a network of ordinary hands who refused to let a city's dignity be auctioned off for glossy renderings. Ifedayo revealed at a press briefing that his involvement would endure not as a donation but as a governance clause, a living agreement that the hub would be run by residents with oversight from a council he would fund and audit. "We will not pretend that wealth is a magic wand," he said, his smile finally meeting the gaze of people who had learned to distrust smiles as currency. "But we will insist that wealth can be a blade that cuts away fear when wielded with accountability." The crowd clapped in a way that sounded like rain on a tin roof, not celebration so much as relief. Aisha felt Kemi's small hand slip into hers, and the feverish heat in her chest ease, as if the disease of despair had a more difficult time living where transparency stood. Aisha's own voice rose in a direct question to Ifedayo. "If this is truly ours, then we must decide who speaks for us when the cameras go away." And the billionaire answered with a careful nod, promising to step back when the community spoke and to stand by when it needed a strong limb to lean on. The moment redrew the city's lines of power without erasing the work that had already been done. The eviction notices were revisited with a fresh lens, the old developers' ambitions were shelved by a court order, and the rumor mill slowed enough for facts to travel faster than fear. With the hub's governance in motion, the money started doing what bread does to hunger, transforming a private burden into a shared resource, a private fear into a collective resolve, a private photograph into a public archive of truth. The new normal did not erase the fear of wealth's old gravity, but it made space for a healthier gravity. Ifedayo's wealth still pulled toward big buildings and glass, yet his pull now pointed toward the people's table, the clinic's white walls, and the children's notebooks. The market hummed with the careful industry of people who had learned to measure risk in breadth and trust rather than in numbers alone. The danfo horns sounded as if they were learning to breathe more evenly. The generators roared with purpose rather than panic, and the rain that once fell like a curtain over humiliation now fell with the soft cadence of a promise kept. Aisha opened her stall, naming it with a quiet pride that was not loud but true. Kemi's dawn would be the sun rising after fever, the way a mother's love returns even when the night has taken too long, and she trained Malika's hands to manage the purse strings as deftly as she had learned to saddle a dream. The children, free of the shadow of eviction and the sting of slander, found in their days a lighter rhythm. Musa helped at the health kiosk after school, learning how to count pills the way a drummer counts beats, and Kemi, now steadier, began drawing pictures of boats and fish in the sea's patient, endless blue. Ifedayo's foundation opened micro-clinics in nearby communities and funded a weekly storytelling hour that healed the wounds of fear with shared memory and laughter, and a new choir of market sellers began to practice a repertoire of songs about courage that could travel from Oshodi to the city's gleaming towers if only people would listen. The antagonist's consequences still loomed in the background: the forged signature, the printing press, the pastor's stake in a scheme. Yet the weight of those truths no longer felt like a trap but a map that showed where the road to justice ran, not where it could be bought or borrowed. The final image of this interval beat was not a triumph parade but a child's eye catching the sun over a line of new stalls and whispering, with the innocence that makes adults tremble and hope, "It's really going to be okay, isn't it?" And Aisha answering with a smile that braided all their lives into a single thread, "Yes, it is, because we built it together." There remains a shadow in the margins, the lingering question of the overcoat, the anonymous donor who still could be watching, the one who learned to recognize a market's hunger in a glance and who could still decide to pull the plug or push the lever. And yet the wealth gap drama now plays differently. Not a single wealthy hand swooping in to fix everything, but a seated council, a ledger publicly read, a community that shares risk and reward, and a billionaire whose power is measured not by how much he can give, but by how transparent he can be about why and for whom. The last image the scene leaves behind is the smallest of acts. Aisha lifting a new bowl toward Kemi's fevered lips, the crowd around the health kiosk answering with a chorus of "We belong" whenever a child coughs or a mother pauses at the threshold of fear, and the camera, if you could glimpse it, would catch their faces in a soft, forgiving light as the city, at last, begins to deserve its own mercy. So the interval beat ends not with a bow, but with a doorway into next chapter, a doorway through which Ifedayo's name, now spoken as friend and custodian rather than distant benefactor, glides with the market's pulse, and the lesson lingers in every breath. Kindness is seed, power is stewardship, justice is a practice, and mercy that is earned remains the bravest kind of wealth. The two threads that remain open: 1, the mystery of the overcoat observer who could still flip the switch, and 2, the ongoing work of accountability that must outlive any one person's moment of glory. Anchor the next act, while the present one seals a new ordinary. The long, patient work of a city learning to feed its most vulnerable without ever letting them become mere pages in a report. If this story truly moved you, leave a comment below with your thoughts or a memory of a kindness that surprised you. And if you liked this tale, please subscribe, like, and share so the next story finds more ears. Turn on notifications and come back for another folk tale that walks the dusty streets and quiet courtyards of our cities with heart. The last lines rest on Aisha's steady, hopeful gaze across the market's waking glow, a gentle vow hanging in the air. One dawn at a time, mercy multiplies, and justice is what you do when no one is looking, but everyone is listening. One thread still glimmers in the distance, a whisper that the overcoat might reappear with a new name, a new scene. But for now, the hub breathes, the children dream in classrooms bright with scholarships, and the city learns to listen to the smallest bowls and the loudest hearts alike.